This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
This series contains adult language and depictions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. So, summer's over, gang. Here in Los Angeles, the kids have been back in school for a couple weeks already. And back east, they're ready to go on Monday, after one last hurrah this weekend when we celebrate the official end of summer with the Labor Day holiday. Now, for the most part, I've kept it pretty light, content-wise, these last 2 months or so. But that, like summer, has also come to an end. Today's episode is a tragic, maddening tale of youth gone wrong, misplaced faith, and an even greater case, in my opinion, of misplaced blame. If you happen to listen to my other podcast, Criminal Mischief, then you're probably aware of the difficulties I sometimes express in covering murder cases that involve kids and teenagers. But here we are. I've been meaning to cover this case for a few months now, as there was a possibility of some new updates regarding the parole status of the convicts. But I'm tired of waiting. Plus, next summer will mark the 30-year anniversary of the event. And disturbingly, the case involves high school kids. So I thought of this episode as a grisly nod to the back-to-school season and a reminder to keep tabs on your kids, especially who they choose to spend their time with. Welcome back to The Devil Within. You're listening to Ticket to Hell. I want to plant a flag here right away. If you listen to Season 1 of The Devil Within, then you're familiar with my feelings on the legitimacy of popular media affecting our nation's youth in a negative way. I talked about the PMRC and their successful bid to attach warning labels to music they found to be illicit. And by illicit, they meant music that might elicit behavior allegedly promoted in some popular music: sex, drug use, violence, and satanic worship, the Mount Rushmore of parental nightmares. In the wake of the Tommy Sullivan murder-suicide, a lot of time, media coverage, and hand-wringing went into the type of music Tommy had only recently begun to listen to. And that music was, of course, heavy metal, speed metal, death metal. It's not like Tommy was listening to John Denver or Madonna and the community went, aha, that's what turned him into a murderer. No. It's the angry music, the evocative, performative, hard-hitting, angst-driven, some might even say call-to-action type of hard rock that was suddenly in the crosshairs of worried parents everywhere. Oh, and rap music, because in suburbia, African-American culture is very scary. As often stated, I'm a Gen Xer, and as far as I can tell, as the generation that the grown-ups of the 80s were trying to save, we turned out okay. Yes, we've had our bad apples like every generation, but being surrounded as we were by this supposedly massively influential music that was sure to turn us all into rapey, murderous lunatics, well, that didn't happen. Was our ostensibly unavoidable descent into a cauldron of bloodshed and crime really prevented by a sticker on our CD cases warning our parents that gangster rappers use bad language and violent imagery, or that the Red Hot Chili Peppers record songs about sex and drugs? Were several generations actually saved by that little sticker? Personally, I always considered it a hurricane in a teacup, even back then. My feeling was, and is, that kids are influenced by an incredibly wide variety of incoming data. Primarily parents and siblings, then extended family, friends, teachers, coaches, clergy, and then popular media. You know, it's on the list. but not high enough to really move the needle. But then you hear about a case like the murder of Elise Pahler, and, well, it really makes you think about things. Elise was born on April 24th, 1980, and grew up in San Luis Obispo County, California, about 200 miles north of Los Angeles. She was the oldest of 4 children and raised in a relatively strict religious family. They weren't fanatics, but they were definitely believers and were a dependable presence at Sunday services. And as often happens with kids who grow up in what they consider to be a strict environment, especially when they see other kids enjoying freedoms that they are denied. I mean, many TV shows were off limits in the Pahler house. Same with rock music and rated R movies. And dating was forbidden. Other kids, it seemed, had more freedoms. So, kids like Elise are often more prone to finding a rebellious streak in their teen years. And with Elise, she decided to experiment with marijuana. Also, she met a boy. Jacob Delaschmidt was 16 years old, and unfortunately, he had already kind of let the world know what kind of person he planned to be. By his junior year in high school, he had already done a stint in drug rehab, and he was a member of a death metal band that will play heavily into our story. It's been determined that Elise and Jacob were on the same bus. They became friends, and it wasn't long before they were getting high together. It was never anything serious with Elise. Again, she seemed to just be rebelling against what was expected of her. All she needed to do was look in the mirror to feel the weight of family expectations. She was a beautiful young woman, blonde hair, blue eyes, with that golden look of the quintessential California beach kid. She was smart and talented with a creative eye that impressed everyone who witnessed it. She enjoyed sewing her own dresses and was considering a career in the fashion industry. But she had a problem that she didn't know about. And it wasn't Jacob. I mentioned Jacob's band earlier. It was a 3-piece death metal band called Hatred. Along with Jacob Delaschmidt were his best friends, 17-year-old Royce Casey and 15-year-old Joseph Fiorella. These kids, it's fair to say, were committed to, if not their music, to becoming rock stars. That's all they really cared about. Fame, notoriety, being worshipped by millions of adoring fans. And they would do whatever they had to do to achieve that goal. Except, practice or write songs and play gigs. No, none of that stuff. They wanted a shortcut to stardom. And we know that always works out, right? So, Hatred's musical genre was death metal. Now, I'm not a fan of that genre, and I don't think I've ever actually listened to an entire death metal song on purpose. I'm not throwing shade here. I mean, I also don't like reggae. I'm not saying anything bad about reggae. Just don't like the music. I don't like the genre. Same with death metal. They're just not my cup of tea. But the reason the music factors so heavily into this story is all the baggage that comes with death metal, especially the ties to Satanism. Accurate or not, the entire genre is closely associated with devil worship. Some of the bands reject that stigma, while others really lean into it. The band Hatred, obviously, was drawn to the bands that leaned heavily into satanic imagery in their songs, and there are quite a few of those bands. It was sometime in the spring of 1995 that the youngest kid in the band, Joe Fiorella, again just 15, happened to meet Jacob's friend, Elise. They were the same age. Elise was super pretty and cool, according to Jacob, and Joe fell hard for her. But he was 15. He didn't have a clue how to handle these big feelings, so he stuffed them down and focused on how to become a rock star while immersing himself in devil-worshipping death metal songs. Whew. But the attraction soon turned into an obsession. perhaps fueled by the intense messages from the music he was listening to. Hey, listen, I said perhaps. You don't have to email me, okay? But by early summer, a connection was made that, horrifically, they felt could solve all their problems at once. We'll be right back after this.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Do you have a point of sale system you can trust, or is it a real POS? You need Shopify for retail. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify POS has everything you need to sell in person. Go to shopify.com/system, all lowercase, to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/system.
They wanted to be rock stars. They wanted to be death metal stars, the kind of death metal music that glorifies Satan. And Joe really liked Elise and didn't know what to do about it. So these three fucking children decided that the devil himself could pull the necessary strings to guarantee them rock god status if only they offered him a sacrifice. Joseph Fiorella, allegedly, was the one to suggest, hey, I bet Satan would appreciate the sacrifice of a blonde-haired, blue-eyed virgin. And we just happen to know one. So, yeah, that was their plan. Kill a young girl, beautiful inside and out, as a sacrifice to glorify Satan in order to, as they put it, earn a ticket to hell and become rock stars along the way. To the parents out there listening, I apologize for putting some terrible images in your head, but it's going to get worse for a little while. So these boys devised a plan. Jacob would lure Elise to a eucalyptus grove just a quarter mile from her house. He tempted her with the promise of some good weed, and she accepted. Once arrived, the other two would ambush Elise and overpower her. The plan, such as it was successful. While she was distracted by the threat of Royce and Joe, Jacob slipped a belt around her neck and began to strangle her. But he didn't kill her. Yet. First, the boys raped her. Then Joseph Fiorella began stabbing her with a hunting knife. All right, so most times I'm comfortable relating the terrible things murderers do to their victims, but sometimes, like now, it's just different. I'll let you guys Google it if you're interested, but suffice it to say that Elise endured further indignities before she died and was buried in a shallow grave in that quiet grove of eucalyptus trees. Elise was reported missing by her parents, and the police had absolutely nothing to go on, no leads at all, and the case went cold. Elise hadn't mentioned any new friends to her parents or teachers, and no one at school ever seemed to notice her hanging out with these kids from a rock band. She had secrets from everyone. It would be 8 months before one of the assailants, 17-year-old Royce Casey, also from a religious family, would confess his crimes to a member of the local clergy. The clergyman, as he was compelled to do, notified police, and Royce was taken into custody before he could alert his co-conspirators that he'd flipped on them. The next thing Royce did was lead investigators to Elise Pahler's remains in the eucalyptus grove. Delaschmidt and Fiorella were then taken into custody, and all three boys were charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, rape, kidnapping, 7 counts each in all. At the trial, the murder was described as among the most brutal and horrific in the history of San Luis Obispo County. The chief investigator for the district attorney's office stated that Elise was chosen because she was, in the boys' estimation, perfect. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and a virgin. Just the type of sacrifice that would please the devil. Royce Casey offered the following explanation. Quote, "By making this perfect sacrifice, it would make us gain more craziness. It would make us play harder, play faster. Yeah, making this perfect sacrifice to the devil would make us go professional." All three were tried as adults and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. More on them in a second. Circling back to the ideas briefly explored in the beginning of this episode, Elise's parents filed a lawsuit against one particular band that they felt was primarily responsible for introducing ideas and giving detailed instructions regarding stalking, rape, and torture to the boys who murdered their daughter. The judge threw out this case, taking the position that there simply was no legal argument to be made, that a band was actually responsible for the girl's death. The thrust of the judge's argument was, really, where would we ever draw the line? We could very well be going through every book in the library, according to the presiding judge. The family, though, continued their fight and filed an additional lawsuit against the band. And yes, I'm purposefully leaving the name of the band out of the episode. Again, you're free to look it up. This lawsuit claimed the band, quote, knowingly distributed harmful material to minors. This case was ultimately dismissed as well, with the new judge declaring that he didn't feel the music in question was obscene, indecent, or harmful to minors. In 2021, Royce Casey was eligible for parole.
It's a story that gained national attention in the mid-1990s, and it's now back in the spotlight.
We're learning that one of the three teens convicted of the murder of 15-year-old Elise Pahler of Arroyo Grande in July of 1995 was recently granted parole suitability. Royce Casey was the oldest of the three. He was 17 years old at the time of Pahler's murder. Jacob DeLashmet was 16 years old and Joseph Fiorella was 15.
They've been behind bars for more than 2 decades now, but Casey may be given another shot at life outside his prison cell. Now that he's been granted parole suitability, the Board of Parole Hearings staff has 90 days to look at the facts, and then the governor has 30 days to review it and decide what's next. KSBY News reporter Alexa Bertola has more on this case from the San Luis Obispo County Courthouse.
Although deemed fit, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, overturned the ruling and denied parole to Royce Casey.
One of the three teens convicted in the 1995 murder of 15-year-old Elise Pahler from Arroyo Grande won't be released from prison. Earlier this year, Royce Casey was granted parole suitability, but Governor Newsom reversed the parole board's decision. All three have been behind bars for more than 2 decades now. Casey, who was the oldest of the three at the time of the murder, is now 43 years old. Our media partners at Newshawk say Pahler was brutally killed as part of a, quote, satanic quest to play better death metal music.
Joseph Fiorella was also denied parole in 2023, and Jacob DeLashmet is eligible in December of this year. Thanks for listening. Be sure you're following The Devil Within wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. You can also check out our socials at The Devil Within Pod on Instagram, Facebook, and now full episodes are available on YouTube. Until next time, stay safe out there. The Devil Within is an EVO production, recorded live at Bel Air Studios in Los Angeles, California. Written and produced by Brandon Morgan, executive produced by Danny Abelson. For The Devil Within, I'm your host, Brandon Morgan.